The entire world just fell for the ultimate geopolitical trap. Yesterday morning, the White House declared absolute total victory. They told the American public that the war was finally over. They claimed the Strait of Hormuz was officially wide open, and physical crude oil immediately crashed right below $80. But that massive orchestrated victory lap didn't even survive the night, because Iran just stepped up to the microphone and shattered the illusion. To actually comprehend the sheer magnitude of the whiplash that just hit the global supply chain over the last 24 hours, you have to look at the incredibly aggressive public narrative that the administration tried to manufacture right as the markets were opening on Friday morning. It started when reports briefly surfaced that Iran's foreign minister had stated the Strait of Hormuz was completely open for commercial vessels during a temporary ceasefire, which the President of the United States immediately seized upon to announce a near-total unprecedented capitulation by the Iranian government. In a stunning sequence of rapid-fire public statements, the Commander-in-Chief proudly thanked Iran for reopening the critical waterway and told the American public that the United States military was actively working hand-in-hand with Iranian forces to completely clear all the sea mines from the Persian Gulf. But the administration absolutely did not stop there, because they proceeded to claim that a final peace deal was mostly complete, explicitly stating that Iran had officially agreed to suspend its nuclear program entirely and had promised to never close the Strait of Hormuz ever again. The White House was so incredibly confident in this massive manufactured diplomatic victory that the president even publicly mocked European allies, stating that when NATO called to offer assistance in the region, he told them to stay away because they were completely useless when needed and acted like a paper tiger. And for a few brief, fleeting hours, the global physical energy markets absolutely bought the story hook, line, and sinker, causing the physical price of United States crude oil to violently crash all the way down to $81 a barrel, officially marking its lowest level since early March. The massive geopolitical risk premium that had been suffocating the American middle class completely evaporated in real time, with physical crude dropping over 32% in just 9 trading days as the world collectively breathed a massive sigh of relief that the worst-case scenario had been avoided. The physical shipping industry, desperate for any sign of relief after weeks of paralysis, actually began preparing massive commercial supertankers to restart their journeys through the Persian Gulf, operating under the completely false assumption that the United States military had successfully secured the waterway and neutralized the threat. But while Washington was busy taking an early victory lap and telling the domestic voter base that the physical inflation crisis was officially over, the leadership in Tehran was quietly preparing to completely dismantle the American narrative and humiliate the administration on the global stage, because right as the sun was setting on Friday evening, Iran's Speaker of the Parliament, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, released a furious, uncompromising public statement that absolutely shattered the illusion of peace and sent a terrifying reality check straight through the heart of the Pentagon. This wasn't just a minor diplomatic misunderstanding. This was a deliberate, catastrophic exposure of an administration that was desperately trying to manifest a geopolitical victory out of thin air, completely blindsiding the physical commodities markets right before they closed for the weekend. Ghalibaf explicitly addressed the president's rapid-fire announcements from earlier in the day, brutally stating on the record that the commander-in-chief had made 7 massive claims in 1 single hour, and that absolutely all 7 of those claims were completely, entirely false. He made it incredibly clear to the entire world that the United States did not win this war with manufactured lies, and that Washington is certainly not going to get anywhere in the diplomatic negotiations by engineering public opinion and trying to trick the global markets into a false sense of security. And then he delivered the ultimate, terrifying ultimatum regarding the most critical physical choke point on the planet, explicitly stating that as long as the United States Navy continues its aggressive, forceful naval blockade, the Strait of Hormuz will absolutely not remain open to Western commercial shipping. The Iranian Speaker of the Parliament told the international community that any passage through the strait will only be conducted based on designated routes and with explicit Iranian authorization, directly challenging the American military's attempt to seize absolute physical control over the waterway. He finished his massive takedown of the White House narrative by delivering a chilling, undeniable truth about modern asymmetric warfare, stating that whether the strait is open or closed will be entirely determined by the physical reality on the battlefield, and absolutely not by social media posts coming out of Washington. And that terrifying, undeniable reality came crashing down on the global shipping industry on Saturday morning, proving that while the financial markets were completely frozen for the weekend, the actual physical war in the Middle East was aggressively escalating. Because those massive commercial shipping conglomerates that had just received the official green light from Washington to safely navigate the Persian Gulf suddenly found themselves sailing completely blind into a massive, highly coordinated military trap. Iran's military command did not just issue another stern diplomatic warning. They took immediate, devastating physical action and officially announced to the entire world that they had completely closed the Strait of Hormuz once again, completely overriding the administration's premature declaration of peace. The absolute worst-case scenario for the global physical supply chain was instantly realized when breaking intelligence reports confirmed that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps had actively conducted at least 3 separate, highly calculated attacks on commercial shipping vessels. The United States military was forced to immediately step forward and publicly confirm these devastating strikes, completely destroying the White House narrative that they had successfully secured the critical waterway and were peacefully clearing sea mines alongside Iranian forces. The absolute chaos in the region is aggressively multiplying by the hour, with terrifying new reports emerging of a massive oil tanker being directly struck near the coast of Oman, proving that this conflict is rapidly expanding well beyond the immediate 21-mile choke point. Think about the absolute catastrophic psychological and financial damage this specific sequence of events has inflicted on the global shipping industry, who just watched millions of dollars of their physical cargo get actively targeted in a combat zone because they mistakenly trusted the White House. Every single maritime insurance company on the planet is currently watching this absolute chaos unfold and realizing that any commercial vessel attempting to cross the Middle East right now is essentially navigating a lethal, entirely unprotected firing range. This brutal reality means the physical cost of insuring a massive commercial supertanker is going to violently skyrocket overnight, pushing the baseline logistics costs to unimaginable levels that will completely break the back of the entire physical global supply chain. The administration in Washington is now staring directly at a catastrophic, highly public military failure, realizing that their massive multi-billion-dollar aircraft carriers and guided missile destroyers cannot effectively protect slow-moving commercial cargo ships from highly agile asymmetric drone and missile strikes. And because this massive, violent escalation occurred on a Saturday, while the global physical commodities markets are trapped in a frozen state for the weekend, the entire industrial world is currently holding its breath in a state of absolute suffocating panic. You can absolutely guarantee that when the physical energy markets finally open for trading, that artificial, heavily manipulated drop to $80 a barrel is going to violently reverse, sending a massive, uncontrollable shockwave of inflation straight back into the American economy. The Iranian leadership has successfully executed an absolute masterclass in psychological and asymmetric warfare, deliberately allowing the United States to declare a massive public victory just so they could completely humiliate the administration on the global stage 24 hours later. They violently ripped the rug right out from under the global economy, proving that they can systematically choke off the flow of physical energy whenever they want, regardless of how many American naval fleets are currently parked in the Persian Gulf. We are now looking at an incredibly dangerous, prolonged geopolitical standoff, where the United States Navy is forced to maintain a massive, highly exposed presence in a heavily mined waterway, while Iranian forces actively dictate the absolute pace and intensity of the war. The physical reality on the ground has completely and utterly overpowered the political spin coming out of Washington, D.C., proving once and for all that you simply cannot manifest a physical global supply chain back into existence when your heavily armed adversary holds the detonator. The everyday American taxpayer is now realizing that the government completely lied to them about the stability of the Middle East, falsely promising an end to the skyrocketing gas prices just hours before the entire region erupted into flames all over again. Washington essentially trapped its own citizens in a massive geopolitical head fake, briefly offering them the false hope of economic relief before plunging them right back into a terrifying reality where the physical cost of basic survival is completely dictated by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. This catastrophic 24-hour timeline will go down in history as one of the most devastating miscalculations in modern American military strategy, completely destroying the credibility of the United States on the global stage and leaving the domestic economy totally exposed to the impending energy shock. But while the entire world is anxiously staring at the massive military chaos unfolding in the Persian Gulf this weekend, the administration is desperately trying to hide an absolute catastrophe that is currently tearing through the domestic economy right here at home. Because the sheer physical cost of merely surviving and going to work in the United States has completely detached from reality, with recent data confirming that the total cost of owning and operating a vehicle has violently skyrocketed by 36% since the beginning of the decade. Everyday Americans are getting absolutely crushed just trying to keep their cars on the road, as the physical cost of basic motor vehicle maintenance and repair has surged by an unimaginable 50%, while the price of actual physical auto parts and equipment has jumped 27%. And when you factor in the massive 56% explosion in auto insurance premiums, you realize that vehicle ownership now accounts for nearly 15% of the entire inflation formula. meaning the physical cost of transportation is one of the biggest drivers destroying the American standard of living. But the physical economic bleeding absolutely does not stop in your driveway, because the Department of Justice is now actively preparing to file a massive federal lawsuit against some of the biggest food producers in the country for allegedly manipulating the physical cost of basic groceries. Federal prosecutors are aggressively targeting massive agricultural conglomerates for illegally coordinating their pricing strategies, specifically pointing to a completely manufactured supply shortage that allowed these corporations to violently hike the physical price of eggs by over 200% over the last couple of years. The government is essentially admitting that while the American middle class was desperately struggling to feed their families during a period of massive physical inflation, critical segments of the domestic food supply were allegedly being controlled by massive corporate monopolies, deliberately squeezing the consumer for every last dime. Yet, despite this overwhelming surge in the physical cost of groceries and transportation, the administration continually points to a relatively stable domestic job market as absolute proof that the American economy is remaining incredibly strong and completely resilient in the face of this massive global chaos. But when you actually pull back the curtain and look at the terrifying mathematical reality of the federal budget, you realize that this supposed economic resilience is nothing more than a massive, completely unsustainable illusion funded entirely by catastrophic levels of government debt. The United States federal budget deficit has violently expanded to an absolutely staggering 7% of nominal gross domestic product, completely doubling the pre-pandemic levels and burning through a terrifying $1.2 trillion in just the first 6 months of the current fiscal year. To put that massive government spending spree into its proper historical context, a catastrophic budget deficit of that sheer magnitude has historically only ever occurred during the absolute darkest days of a deep structural recession or a severe systemic financial crisis. Macroeconomic analysts are now looking at this unprecedented flood of federal debt and warning that without this massive artificial government intervention, the true American unemployment rate would currently be sitting at an absolutely crippling 8.5%. We are talking about a scenario where the true underlying domestic unemployment rate is actually double what the government is publicly reporting, meaning the administration is literally borrowing trillions of dollars they do not have just to artificially mask a massive domestic labor crisis. The United States government is essentially running the domestic economy on the absolute highest setting of emergency life support, desperately printing money to hide the physical economic contraction from the American voter while funding a massive open-ended naval blockade halfway across the world. And the everyday American taxpayer is trapped right in the middle of this massive economic cover-up, forced to absorb the catastrophic physical inflation at the grocery store and the gas pump, while their government burns through the national treasury just to keep the entire system from violently collapsing. This is the exact reason why the global commodities markets are absolutely terrified of the current geopolitical trajectory, because you absolutely cannot fight a multi-trillion-dollar physical resource war in the Middle East when your own domestic economy is secretly hemorrhaging jobs and drowning in historic levels of federal debt. And while the United States government is desperately trying to hide this massive domestic economic fragility behind a wall of borrowed money, they are quietly entering a state of absolute panic regarding the catastrophic physical shortages completely dismantling the global supply chain. Because Washington is finally waking up to the terrifying reality that whoever physically controls the world's critical raw materials will ultimately dictate the survival of the modern economy, forcing United States Trade Representative Jamieson Greer to aggressively prepare a completely unprecedented critical minerals trade pact. This massive plurilateral trade deal is deliberately designed to completely lock down the supply chains of select Western allies, actively attempting to create a highly protected internal market with a strict price floor to completely block Chinese dumping and forcefully secure physical resources for the American technology sector. But while the administration desperately scrambles to draft new trade agreements to protect future critical minerals, they are completely ignoring the absolute most devastating and historic supply squeeze currently detonating right now inside the physical global silver market. We are officially watching physical silver enter a completely unprecedented, terrifying sixth consecutive year of massive structural deficits, with the global physical shortfall projected to violently widen by another 15% this year to reach an estimated 46 million troy ounces. To truly comprehend the sheer, staggering magnitude of this industrial supply crisis, you have to realize that since the beginning of 2021, an unimaginable 762 million physical ounces of silver have been completely depleted and wiped out from global inventories. The global technology manufacturing sector is actively burning through massive amounts of physical silver for solar panels, advanced military electronics, and electric vehicles at a pace that the constrained, byproduct-dependent global mining industry simply cannot ever hope to keep up with. And the massive panic surrounding this severe structural shortage is triggering an absolute run on the Western physical vaults, with the absolute latest depository reports confirming that another 1.15 million physical ounces were just aggressively withdrawn from major institutions like JP Morgan and Loomis in a single day. The massive critical 1,000-ounce physical bars required by heavy industrial manufacturers are becoming so incredibly scarce in the Western world that an estimated 213 million ounces have forcefully flowed out of the United States and directly over to London and China. This massive, panicked migration of physical assets is actively breaking the pricing mechanisms of the global commodities market, creating a terrifying scenario where the actual physical price of silver in the East has completely detached from the manipulated, paper-driven prices in the West. Right now, physical silver is violently soaring to over $93 an ounce on the Shanghai exchange, creating an absolutely staggering $10.77 physical premium over the heavily financialized prices currently being quoted in the United States. The Eastern world is aggressively demanding actual physical delivery and paying massive premiums to secure the absolute lifeblood of the modern technology sector, while the Western world is entirely distracted by phantom peace deals and drowning in trillions of dollars of completely unbacked fiat currency. We are watching the complete physical wealth transfer of the global economy happen in real time, right as the United States military finds itself trapped in a massive, unwinnable naval blockade that guarantees the physical cost of energy is going to break the domestic supply chain. I want to know exactly what you guys think about this massive physical wealth transfer. Do you believe the United States can actually secure its critical minerals before China completely drains the physical silver market? Or is this massive supply deficit already completely out of control? Drop your thoughts down in the comments below. Make sure you hit that subscribe button to stay updated as the physical markets violently react to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz when the trading desks open on Monday morning, and I will see you in the next breakdown.